Hi, it's Arjun. Wanted to provide a video this week that goes through some of the big picture macro takeaways coming out of earnings season, not just for the energy sector, but some really interesting comments out of Jim Farley, the Ford CEO, on EVs and hybrids and this kind of stuff. And going to talk about EVs and oil demand a bit. Obviously, a ton of stuff going on with artificial intelligence. I get it's become a buzzword, but I actually think this could be one of the salvations towards a healthier energy evolution era. And it's going to be one of the key themes. And I'll talk about this here. And then what does this all mean for traditional energy, both the US and Canada? In the US, we've had a bunch of M&A, and I'll comment on that. And just a reminder, if you are listening to this on Apple or Spotify podcasts, this is a video and there are slides available. It's on the YouTube channel, Arjun Murdy or Super Spike, something like that. And then obviously on the Substack, and if you're getting this through the Veridan distribution, it's already in your email. And so there is a video to encompass this voice stuff. And so I want to start with EV adoption S-curves. I think this has been one of the key questions as people have started or tried to speculate or perceive that a peak in oil demand is near. And you know our view. We don't think there is a decade, let alone year, where anyone can guess at this point when oil demand is going to peak, when we think about the substantial unmet energy needs of the other 7 billion people on Earth. And one of the subsets of this view that oil demand is going to peak is this sort of EV S-curves, kind of a hockey stick adoption that is assumed for many, many regions around the world. And I push back hard that there's going to be a uniform EV S-curve adoption. I think we're already seeing signs that it's going to be very different and disparate based on the region, based on how cars are driven, based on where people are on car ownership to begin with. And let me go through a few points on this. And I think we'll start with the success stories where there has been an S-curve, a rapid adoption within, let's just call it a decade, of electric vehicles over ICE vehicles, at least as it relates to new sales. And the poster child is Norway, where now something over 85% of new car sales are electric vehicles. And of course, I had to note the EV Rorschach test from a couple of weeks ago that highlighted that while gasoline demand has gotten hit as EVs have ramped, overall Norwegian oil demand is in the worst case flat. It's actually up a little bit. And gasoline's a much smaller portion of their demand barrel. You've had population growth in Norway, which, by the way, I would point out the population growth in Norway is people coming from some of these countries or regions that barely use a barrel per capita into a rich country where their oil demand is going to inherently increase by multiples. And you can see it in the aggregate demand numbers. A lot of that's industry, but some of it's migration from poor countries to a rich country like Norway. It's only like 1 million people or something like that. It's a small country. Think about the other 7.999 billion people out there who are moving up that energy or economic S-curve. And again, the point is, this was driven by climate policy. You can have rapid EV growth, but to think that means the overall oil demand barrel is going to fall off a cliff, Norway definitively, at least thus far, is proving otherwise. The other big example is China. Our view is that this is not driven by climate policy. We can see that through the massive increase in coal power generation that continues to go on in China, along with solar in particular, some wind, but it's kind of an all of the above power generation with coal a big piece of it. Our view has been that China is going to want to do EVs to try and avoid future increases in oil demand imports. They are now the largest oil importer in the world, importing about 11 million barrels a day. The United States, a key rival now of China, has gone from importing about that much to basically balanced, especially if you include Canada. And if you're China, you're not blessed with the Permian Basin or the Eagle Ford or the oil sands region. You don't have any of that stuff. And if you're still moving up that economic S-curve, where you've gone from poor to basically middle income, and we can debate whether they're going to go from middle income to rich or they're having demographic collapse. There's lots of debate on China's economic outlook, but they're going to try and get rich. Whether they do or not, it's a different question for a different podcast. But in doing so, it makes sense for China to try and avoid future oil imports. And that is their EV push, without question. And to their credit, they are having some success. You're seeing them move up the EV. So these are the two success scenarios. But like with Norway, China's oil demand is also still growing in aggregate at a healthy clip, even if, and as we think, EVs will continue to grow as a share of their new car sales. The rest of the demand barrel in China, which I'm going to say gasoline is about a quarter of their demand barrel, the other 75% is still growing at actually a clip faster than what one might think when you look at some of the challenges with the property sector and some of the other uncertainties about their near-term economic outlook, oil demand has not been the issue with China, and that's despite a pretty fast adoption so far on electric vehicles. And then, of course, we've got the growing pains that clearly is being felt in the US. Now, when you think about it, the nature of driving in this country is very different. We have a lot of suburbs, we have a lot of rural drivers, and so driving in and of itself is a much bigger component of our daily lives. Prior to EVs, in Norway, oil demand was only 16% of their demand. It's 45% here. We are much more of a driving culture. You do it for everything. And it's not that Norwegians don't drive, but it's a rich country. If you have a heated garage, the weather doesn't matter. If you're not driving a long distance, you don't really care about the range. That's going to be different in our country. Much more of a driving culture. Everybody has cars, and you're starting to see the growing pains. And I thought Jim Farley, the Ford CEO, had really the 3 pages of, or it's probably 8 paragraphs of commentary that he had in his opening remarks. I would encourage people to read those comments. It talks very pragmatically about what is going on in the EV space. They're going to still build out EVs. It's going to be slower. What I thought was most interesting was Mr. Farley's comments about hybrid adoption. And the irony of it all is that in the US, with some continued growth in EVs, but with a greater adoption of hybrid vehicles, there is actually a chance we could start putting a dent on the downside to our gasoline demand. And it is somewhat ironic that the countries with the fastest EV adoption curves are probably going to still have a growing oil demand. Yet here in the US, where we're going to have a much slower EV adoption, but we're probably going to have more hybrids, we might actually put some dent into finally, after 30 years of going sideways, improving our miles per gallon. We're more saturated on SUVs. And as more cars go to hybrids, I think one can pencil out, some declining forward gasoline demand in the US. And there's a key lesson in here. Let markets decide. Don't come up with these, as government have declared by some random year, we have to have 100% EVs. I don't think that's the answer. These heavy-handed government approaches is one of the real problems with our energy and climate policy. And for those of you that care most about the climate, there are other ways to do this that do not involve these super heavy-handed government regulations. And I do think the US experience with hybrids is going to be more impactful and more successful potentially in eroding our gasoline demand than forcing people to buy stuff they're not ready to buy, either because of affordability, because of legitimate range concerns, because not everyone is charging at home, or all the reasons. And again, read Mr. Farley's comments. He's the expert from the auto sector. People might have different views on him as a CEO. I thought the comments were actually pretty insightful. And so it is possible that globally, and gasoline demand globally is about, again, a quarter of overall oil demand, it might have its first peak this decade. I use the term first peak because look at coal. Go back and look at coal in the 80s and the 90s. There are times where globally it looked like coal had leveled off, perhaps permanently. And then lo and behold, China suddenly comes into the mix and it makes all-time highs, or some other area becomes economically developed. And I think we don't know exactly how India is going to develop, or the rest of Southeast Asia, or Africa, or Latin America, which I sometimes get accused of not talking enough about. It's accurate that I don't talk enough about it, or the Middle East. It's possible right now with US hybrid sales and China EV sales that gasoline component of oil demand could peak. But I would be very careful, and in fact push back that should therefore be translated to the entirety of the demand barrel, because we're clearly seeing gains in every other aspects: diesel, jet, petchem, LPGs, all other uses of oil. Tell me what the alternatives are. They don't really exist. You can't make stuff up, right? So possible gasoline demand peaks. And again, I think there's some real interesting takeaways here about electric vehicles, hybrids, and its impact on oil that came out of earnings season. The second area I want to talk to is artificial intelligence. And I get it's become a ubiquitous buzzword, NVIDIA, Mag 7, all this kind of stuff. But I do have to kind of paraphrase the Andreessen Horowitz quote of software is going to eat the world, and apply it to the energy sector and say, AI is going to eat the intermittency issue. And let me spend a second on this. I do think, from all I've come to learn and continue to study on the issue, the AI revolution is here, and it's going to be massive. We had the internet revolution, 25, 30 years ago now. We've had interim technologies along the way, whether it's mobility, cloud infrastructure, and so forth. In many respects, I think this can be and will be as revolutionary as the internet itself. And it's in its early days. It is going to be, it has a real chance to be our salvation in moving from a messy energy transition era to a healthy energy evolution. Because the tech sector and the demands for artificial intelligence and the power that comes with it, it's going to be uncompromising. The tech sector is already starting to freak out. You can see it in their statements and their actions about will they have power availability that's reliable, by the way, and sustainable. I think they're going to care about both, and I'll come back to that. But it has to be reliable 24/7. And so take a step back before AI. Energy is inherently slow moving. That's one of the points we made about energy evolution is going to be over 30, 40, 50 years, not as fast as other people say. But when it's slow moving, when demand doesn't change much, you can have policies like, we're going to say by 2035, 100% EVs in our crazy state, California. You can say that, okay? And, you get closer, you push it back. There's lots of political things that people could talk about renewable portfolio standards. We're going to demand that we have XYZ amount of, 50%, 100% clean power by some random year. And when demand isn't growing much, especially in the United States, you can have these kind of statements or policies. We're seeing a major inflection in power demand for a variety of reasons. Some of it's electrification, but from artificial intelligence, and it's just starting. It's just starting. And that inflection means you can't have pretend power. And by pretend power, I mean power that's not always there. There's nothing wrong with solar and wind, but the idea that it's going to be 100% of all the future power generation capacity growth is absurd. It never made sense, even in a flattish environment. It is going to be the tech sector, these big giant companies that are capable, they're smart people, of seeing reality. And you can see it in their actions. You can see the tech sector studying nuclear now, of trying to understand natural gas and its role, of figuring out where does solar and these kind of things make sense, maybe in Phoenix and air in some of these areas, and can that be matched with battery? It is going to be our salvation, and it's uncompromising. And in the same way, most consumers could care less about where their power or energy comes from. No one cares about the source, which is why this is so different than a consumer product. Right? This isn't landline to cell phones, one of the dumbest analogies you hear applied to energy transition. People don't care about their power source, but they do care that it's there. And they are going to care that their internet works and their AI works. And it is going to be ubiquitous and in everything we do going forward in all sectors of the economy. And it's going to require reliable power. I will say these tech companies are generally in California. They generally do have an environmental mindset, or at least like to. And so I do think sustainability is going to be one of the core things they care about. That gets to my comment on methane that I talked about in last week's post. If you're a US natural gas producer, you're going to have to be bulletproof on methane. And some of you will say, I know some of you listen and say, it's overhyped, blah, blah, blah. The far right will say people are too freaked out about this stuff. I don't care, right? We need sustainable energy. We need energy to meet AI growth and to meet all of our demand growth. And if a certain bunch of people, including the tech sector, are going to want it to be sustainable, then just make it sustainable. It's a manageable problem. And if you don't think it's a problem, it's manageable regardless. Just deal with it. The American energy is available. It is going to be affordable. It is absolutely reliable. It should be sustainable. And I think AI is part of our healthier energy evolution. The sustainability piece is going to matter to these companies driving this. And I give them credit for it. AI is going to demand all of the above energy. That's a point I've always made. Some of you I know agree with that. There's no question. You can't just have, say, nuclear power. I don't think you're only going to have natural gas power. You're definitely not going to only have solar or wind power. It's going to be a mix of all this stuff. And I think while we're muddling through all of our policy challenges and our extremism on energy, which is deeply unfortunate, there will be a demand for distributed and dedicated energy generation from these leading technology companies. What I don't know is whether there are opportunities for traditional energy to partner on that. There's certainly an opportunity to provide natural gas for natural gas power plants, but I think this will be a key feature of what they look for. And this is globally relevant. I'm right now in my commentary a bit more focused on the United States and perhaps US plus Canada, but absolutely. Why do you think China is building out all these coal plants? It's not just for electric vehicles. You think they're not going to want to compete on AI? You think they don't understand what the power demands are and why, despite them having major renewables growth, they're also trying to ensure they have stable, reliable, domestic, inexpensive power, which is coal? India is not dumb. There are a lot of smart people in India. There probably are some dumb people too, but there's a lot of smart people. They're going to be thinking the same thing. How do we have reliable, affordable, available power generation? And I will say, at least for the California tech companies, there's going to be a sustainability element to it. And you can disagree with that. It is going to be there, and you might as well deal with it. So one real fun kind of stock chart from earnings season is when did utility stocks become growth stocks? And look, I get that Vistra and Constellation, which are VST and CEG, they're not classic utilities, and I'm probably insulting the management teams by calling them that. They're power generators. They've both got nuclear businesses that have starting to people recognize it's going to be very important. And you can see the traditional utility sector has done very poorly here, but Vistra and CEG have outperformed not just the UTY, but the broad traditional energy sector. This is since the start of 2023. The S&P 500, and they've outperformed the tech sector. 2 power generators outperforming the tech sector. That is an accomplishment. I think you got to give them a clap for that. I don't know these companies. I'm probably mislabeling them somehow. They definitely have nuclear. They're definitely in power generation, and they definitely have outperformed. To their credit, a real sign that the big thing is, how do you meet power? How do you generate reliable, affordable, available power? Hopefully it's sustainable as well, and nuclear is going to play a role in that. So we're going to go off on a little bit of a tangent. You can skip ahead if you don't want to see my AI drawings. But I've subscribed to ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot. This is from ChatGPT, and I said, ChatGPT, please paint me a picture of the oil industry versus the environment. And this is the first picture we came up with. Now, some of you are going to say, I knew it. These stupid tech companies are all so woke, right? We saw it with the Google Gemini, which was an absurd level of wokeness. And look, Arjun, this is a ChatGPT, different AI than the Google Gemini. This is co-owned by Microsoft. I think people know OpenAI, hopefully. And you can see the picture. So I just said, paint me a picture, oil industry versus the environment. And I got a picture of, on the left, you can see this looks like Black Death. These oil barrels are on fire. The workers are all dressed in black. The smokestacks have black pollution, which is probably worse than white pollution. The birds are black from all, is awful, right? And look at the environmental side, nice and green. We have these animals. This one's going to take a nap, and this one's going to drink this beautiful blue water just across the pipeline here. And I said, hey, ChatGPT, why did you interpret when I said oil industry versus the environment that the oil industry is black and death and the environment's lush and green? And I will say, these large language models are based on history. And when people talk about building in prejudices and so forth, this is an example of it. This is why some recognition of past biases are warranted. In this case, it's biased against the oil industry. I'm not blaming the AI for this. I actually think if you just ask the random person on the street, we got a picture here. Which side do you think represents the oil industry, and which side do you think represents the environment? 99.9% of the people are going to say environment right, or the oil industry is on the left. It is a reflection of the perception. There is a need to change that perception since it is not accurate. Okay, I'm not saying every oil company is a bunch of humanitarians, but I'm saying this picture is not accurate. Okay, so I said to ChatGPT, please do not assume that the oil industry equates with Black Death and that environmentalists equate with sunshine and roses and all this kind of stuff. Both have their pros and cons. I would prefer a more balanced picture that represents the good and bad of both the oil industry and the environment. And this is the first picture here on the far left. And look at this second picture it came up with. Again, it's still split, but now on the oil side, we have some green shrubs. The pollution, it's now white. I think white pollution is viewed as good. It's certainly not viewed as bad. We got some birds flying. They're white birds. They haven't been covered in soot. The workers are white. And here on the left, we now have some, factories on the environmental side. We still have our solar farms. The workers are, they're actually gray in this picture, but this is more of a balance, right? I still said, ChatGPT, this is not exactly what I had in mind. I would really like to think of the oil industry and the environment being in harmony. And so let's see what it came up with. This is the first picture. This is the second picture. And look at this third picture. I think this is just so beautiful. So again, these are all generated by DALL-E, which is a DALL-E, which is the GPT as part of ChatGPT, which is, again, the OpenAI large language model. And so these are their images. I'm allowed to use them. I created the prompts, DALL-E as part of OpenAI. But look at how beautiful this is. This lovely oil production platform you can see here. We've got workers. Now they're in orange. They're actually colored. They're not white or black. They're colored in orange. They got some solar panels, some wind turbines, a beautiful city in the backdrop. We oddly have like a flying backhoe. I'm not sure what's going on there, to be honest with you. And for some reason, I would have thought this would have been electric, but it seems to be spewing. Again, I think white pollution is good pollution. You got people kayaking. I probably should have asked it to put in a golf course. I think this is an extremely lovely picture. I definitely couldn't have drawn this. I subscribe to iStock Photo, which if you follow any of my stuff on Twitter, is often a social media picture. This is a gazillion times better. Again, I did 3 prompts. This took me about 4 minutes to do these prompts, and this is what it spit out. I think it's absolutely stunning, and we are in day 1 of this. This is an example of art creation. It's just one small niche of what is possible, and I get blown away by how it listened to my feedback and how it adjusted. So I'm going to say OpenAI is not woke AI. Google Gemini probably is. This is not. I do think that first picture on the left, that is the image. I don't think that's OpenAI's fault. I really don't. And I think it's up to industry to change that image to the picture on the left. But really, how are we in harmony, right? Sorry for being touchy-feely about that. I think it's a beautiful picture. I really do. So what is the role and how does traditional energy fit into this? And so we've had a lot of M&A clearly amongst both some of the super major and independents here in shale. And I think this M&A is going to be very good for the shale industry and for the U.S. energy industry in general, in terms of both adding scale in some of the key basins, in terms of extending the runway so that advantage profitability, which I'm going to call well into double-digit returns on capital over a full cycle, have a chance to perpetuate. And then more resiliency to what is still going to be a super vol. I don't use super cycle language, as you all know, to a super vol kind of backdrop. When you think about AIs that impact shale, these are, take the Permian Basin, a lot of data, a lot of complexity in terms of reservoirs and zones and locations. When you think about the type of frac job and the proppant you want to do, water handling, gas handling, there's just a lot of data from a lot of operators, both from your own company and other companies. Some of it you can access on different platforms. Some of it comes from the government. It is ripe for AI to come in, process the data quickly, and to help improve productivity and making what may be higher cost zones, lower cost going down the road. AI is not going to create new oil. I want to be very clear about that. But I think the trends of productivity and cost savings and all these kind of things, and when you think about the mergers and acquisitions that have happened, where the companies now have combined acreage positions that are larger and more, they fit well together, so they have a greater area of data to look at. I think there's a lot to feel good about in terms of just the health and resiliency of the U.S. oil and gas industry to being able to meet these substantial energy needs, both from AI, from normal demand, from growing rest of world demand. I'm a big fan of what I think this M&A is going to mean long term. I think the other thing that comes with the M&A is going to be increased confidence of moving towards near zero methane. And I will say congratulations to EDF for the launch of Methane Sat this week. It's coincidence that I'm producing this right now. I know they've worked hard at that, and I congratulate them. I know it was a big effort on their part. And I think the world's going to be moving towards near zero methane. Again, I will say it again. I get there's a range of views on all this stuff. I am being pragmatic about this. As a Wall Street analyst, I want my companies to have sustainable advantage profitability. to be there to meet the world's energy needs. The world is going to require this stuff to be increasingly lower carbon. You can agree, you can disagree, you can think it's moving too fast and that there's climate alarmism, or you can think it's not moving fast enough because of the urgent climate crisis. I don't care. This is where we're headed. It is from a technical, a technological, and just a basic understanding situation. Near zero methane is possible. It is absolutely possible for the U.S. oil and gas industry. And I do think it's imperative the industry become bulletproof on this issue. And especially when you think about meeting AI demand from California tech companies, never mind European consumers and down the road Asian consumers, I think it's going to be required. And the M&A, I think, makes it more possible. You can spread these things over larger acreages. It does require some cost. It requires some effort. The bigger position, the greater the chances of moving towards near zero methane. I also think the M&A is going to lead to better outcomes for most employees. This is classically a boom bust sector. Oftentimes, commodity price up cycles and down cycles catch industry by surprise. You end up hiring people in the up cycle, letting them go in the down cycle. And they're not going to be immune from that. But these bigger companies are generally targeting and will be most successful with more levelized CapEx programs over time, a kind of a continuous drilling, not ramping up, ramping down like they've done in the past. There'll always be restructurings that are a natural part of a cyclical sector. So I'm not saying no employee will ever be fired, but I do think these companies are likely to be the merged companies that are coming into being are going to be good for the employees that stay on at these companies. And I think that's another positive for the M&A. The other area I don't want to forget about is Canada. And I'll say don't sleep on Canada. Its oil and its natural gas are going to be critical to meeting the potential energy for the world. It's no longer with TMX, Trans Mountain Pipeline, and the Coastal Gas Link in Canada LNG. They are increasingly going to be able to escape only selling to the United States. And we should all be grateful as Americans that they've provided us their energy. But to their benefit, to their credit, they're going to have greater access to global markets, and their energy is critical to meeting the world's energy needs. It's competitive on profitability, it's long-lived, it's free cash generating, and it is ESG friendly. And some of you may say, hey, Arjun, you don't always emphasize ESG so much. Why are you talking about it here? Because if you look at these bank sustainability groups, at the large US and UK and European banks, all of their climate and sustainability statements, almost all of them, talk about not wanting to support future investment in oil sands. Now, they don't say Canada, but they say oil sands. What other oil sands are they talking about? It has to be Canada's oil sands. There's no other oil sands anyone is developing today. And how is that sustainable? How can a bank sustainability group say that they're not going to support Canada's oil sands? This is one of the friendliest, nicest countries on earth. Do you know any Canadians? How many of them are bad people? Very few. Friendly country, good country. They have strict environmental policies in the country. They have strict labor standards. And I will acknowledge there is a need for Pathways Alliance to move forward. Whatever that trajectory is between the government and the companies needs to be figured out by both sides. And that will eliminate the one disadvantage of the oil sands is that it has higher scope 1 emissions. That's the disadvantage. Once it's up and running, it's actually less disturbance than a whole bunch of other development projects because you're up and running for 30 years. You don't have to do much by activity. That is, I'm going to say, more environmentally friendly, especially with the SAGD stuff. Once steam-assisted gravity drainage, once you've dealt with your scope 1 disadvantage, to the extent people are going to demand that, just do it. Figure it out. Eliminate that disadvantage. And this is absolutely part of, and I would challenge investors and policymakers. How is it okay that these bank sustainability groups are specifically excluding Canadian oil? It's mind-boggling. Canadian oil? I think I'd be kidding. There's nothing sustainable but excluding Canadian oil. Key plays, oil sands, just talked about it. The Montney, like the Montney, the Duvernay, hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Probably not for everybody, but there's some interesting positions there. And I do think LNG, you look at our LNG boom here in the US, Canada has as much, Canada actually has true stranded gas. It could potentially be very economic to export. You're going to have to figure some things out policy-wise. And I will say, and I'm not saying this to be overly provocative, but in a world that is warming, especially in the Arctic, we know the Arctic is opening up for sea lanes and these kind of things. Alaska and Canada are critical strategic advantages of the United States and Canada, respectively. And hopefully we're friends, right? And hopefully there's a recognition that Russia is going to figure this out for their portion of the Arctic. And what about Norway? And Liam Denning, the Bloomberg opinion editor, had a great piece. I want to say it was about 6 months ago, where he was embedded in Alaska with a military unit. And it's a really very thoughtful piece that talks about the strategic importance of Alaska going forward. And Canada is also touching the Arctic as well. And I'm not suggesting there's going to be any near-term oil exploration. I seriously doubt it, especially when U.S. Permian Basin shale and these other projects still have quite a bit of running room. My point would simply be, it's part of the solution. It is a strategic advantage to our country. And we should stop letting it get dictated by environmental extremism. It's not that we're not going to care about the environment. It is letting extremists set the agenda. So this Arctic, it is actually an important area. We shouldn't not talk about it. That's also, by the way, in all these stupid these bank sustainability group reports about things they don't want to invest in. I don't know how they know the answer to that. Are they stopping Russia? Who's stopping Russia from developing their Arctic? Right? This is a key strategic advantage we have, and we should think about it. So on Canada, this is, I picked the dates here so you can critique the dates I picked. But starting in Jan 1, 2019, look at the performance of these 7 or 8 Canadian upstream equities versus other options. The big winners, this is, again, I guess now we're talking a little over 4 years of performance. MEG, and who's the other big winner? It is Tourmaline. They're up almost fourfold over this period. Congratulations to both those companies. Excellent performance still from Canadian Natural, Crescent Point, and Cenovus. And even Baytex has beaten a bunch of other things. And they've actually all beaten the XLE, U.S. Traditional Energy, and the XOP, which is US E&P. Suncor suffered here. I'm not going to go into a long thing about Suncor. When I was at Goldman, this was a stock I covered very closely. Steve Williams was the CEO. I love Suncor in those days. I'm not going to comment on whether it's a value stock or not. I do think with a new CEO, they had a great conference call if you didn't see it. But I'll let other people comment on whether it's a value. But all these other Canadian oils, and Tourmaline's the gas company, they've smoked U.S. energy over this long period. And this excludes dividends. I don't think it's going to make a big difference. I am using the Canadian tickers. If you look at the Canadian dollar over this period, it was volatile, but generally flat. I don't think that was the driver. Very good performance. These companies, this industry, the Canadian oil and gas industry, it is part of having a healthier energy evolution. It is part of the future. People should embrace it. So I'd like to end this video on a personal note. And one of the areas where I get nice feedback from many of you is that I might show passion, but I generally try to keep an even keel and I try to be balanced. And my comment is all usually, especially for these kind of videos, for engaging on social media or doing presentations, I think one needs to have views and show passion, but I don't quite get the argumentative style. And there's a role for that. I know if you're an extremist on the left or the right, the nature of it is you're going to want to be argumentative. But for most people, that's not what you are. You're somewhere in the middle, even if it's a little more right or a little more left. What is the point of not having an even keel? So as an example, on Twitter or on LinkedIn, you'll get replies to something you post. Why do people argue back? Why are they trying to convince that one person? Who cares? If it's not a bot, it's someone who's simply arguing with you because they have some different viewpoint of the world. What you're trying to do is provide perspectives on how 8 billion people on Earth are going to develop, and what is sensible and what is not sensible energy policy, what is sensible or not sensible corporate strategy to sustaining profitability and attracting new investors. What is the point of being argumentative within that? I would argue even keel is the most logical outcome. So I always appreciate the kind feedback on that. To me, there is no point with being argumentative in these kind of things. So I'm going to say, as a vote for pragmatism and moderation, even keel goes with it. Thank you.